Her mother-in-law sold her with 6 goats and a spinning wheel to a hermit in the hills. I counted the goats twice before I counted her. That tells you something about the kind of fool I'd turned myself into by then. 6 goats, ribby and loud, a spinning wheel with a cracked treadle wrapped in burlap, and a girl standing behind the wagon wheel like she meant to disappear into the spokes. Old Mrs. Tillett sat up on the bench with the reins slack in her hands and didn't so much as look at the girl when she said it. Said it the way you'd mention the weather. She comes with the goats, take it or don't, but I ain't haulin' her back down that mountain. I'd been alone on that ridge 11 years. 11 winters of talking to a mule named Caesar and a dog that died on me the second winter and I never replaced. I traded for things. Furs for flour, hides for nails. I did not trade for women, and I told Mrs. Tillett so, plain, while the wind came down off the rocks and worked its way into my collar. She didn't argue. She just sat there with her mouth a flat line and waited, like she had all day, like the mountain owed her nothing and never had. The girl's name was Naomi. I didn't learn that till later. That first hour she didn't speak at all, just stood with her hands folded over her stomach like she was holding something in that wanted out. Her dress had a tear at the hem mended with the wrong color thread, mended by somebody who didn't care if it showed. Her husband, Mrs. Tillett's son, had died of the fever that came through the lower valley that spring. I knew that much because everybody knew that much. News travels slow up here, but it travels. What I didn't know, what I learned in pieces over the months that followed, sitting across a fire from a woman who'd stopped expecting kindness from anybody, was that his mother had decided a widow without a child was a debt that needed settling. 6 goats, a spinning wheel. A girl who could cook and sew and not eat too much, handed off to a man so far gone from people he'd half forgot his own name, had a sound when somebody said it out loud. I almost sent her back down with the wagon. I want that on the record because it shames me some, but I want it said anyway. I stood there working my jaw, looking at this girl who wasn't asking me for anything, who hadn't said one word in her own defense, and I thought about the trouble of another mouth to feed, another set of footsteps in my cabin, another voice when I'd gotten so used to quiet I'd started to think of it as a kind of peace. Then she looked at me. Just once, quick like she was checking the weather, checking what kind of storm she'd landed in. And there wasn't fear in it exactly. There was a kind of arithmetic. She was working out what she'd have to be, what she'd have to do to get through whatever came next. I'd seen that look before. I'd worn it myself, a long time back, in a war I don't talk about, the year I came home to find there wasn't anything left worth coming home to. I told Mrs. Tillett I'd keep the goats. She was already turning the wagon. The cabin had 2 rooms if you were generous about calling the lean-to a room. I gave her the good one, the one with the stove, and I moved my cot out to the lean-to without being asked and without explaining why. She watched me do it. Didn't thank me. I understood that. Thanking a man for the bare minimum of decency when you've just been sold for livestock might be more than a person can manage. First week she didn't talk past what was needed. Salt, wood, where's the well? I answered in the same coin. We ate at the same table and looked at our plates. But I noticed things. It's most of what I've got left to do up there, noticing. She favored her left hand setting things down, like the right one ached in the cold. She flinched when I came up behind her too quiet, not because I'd ever raised a hand to anybody in that cabin, but because somewhere a hand had been raised to her, and a body remembers that math longer than the mind wants to admit. She hummed when she thought I was out checking the goat pen, something with no words, low in her throat, and stopped the second the door creaked. I started creaking the door on purpose, the first few times, just to hear a little more of it before it cut off. Then I felt low about that and quit. Second week she started watching how I worked the wood, how I split it, and one morning when I came in from the pen she'd already laid the kindling the way I lay it, the exact stack, and didn't say anything about it, just handed me coffee like that was nothing, like she hadn't been studying me to find some way to be useful enough to keep. I told her she didn't have to earn her place. She looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Everybody earns their place, she said, first full sentence she gave me that wasn't about salt or wood. That's just how it works. I didn't answer that. Some things you can't argue a person out of with words. You have to wear them down a different way, over time, the way water works a stone, not by telling the stone it's wrong to be hard. There was a man named Hollis Pratt who ran cattle in the lower valley and had wanted that mountain water claim of mine for going on 6 years. He'd come up twice before with an offer, and twice I'd told him no and meant it both times. He came a third time that fall, 3 weeks after the goats, and this time he brought two men I didn't know and a different look on his face. The look of a man who decided the easy way wasn't working and was ready to try the other way. Naomi was at the well when they rode in. I watched Pratt's eyes go to her and stay there a beat too long, the way a man looks at something he's deciding whether he can take along with whatever else he came to take. I didn't say much. I'm not a man of much talking, never was, but I walked myself between that well and those horses without making a show of it, and I stood there with my hand resting easy on nothing in particular, and I let Pratt finish whatever he'd ridden up there to say. He said it was a generous offer. He said a man alone up here with, and he paused on the word, looking past me at her, with a household to think of now, ought to consider his situation might be changing. I told him my situation was my own business, and the water stayed mine, and he could ride back down the way he came. He laughed, not a friendly laugh, and one of his men shifted his coat back enough to show the handle of something. I'd been shot at before, in a war that taught me a great many things I didn't ask to learn, and one of them was that a man who wants you scared will usually show you the gun before he uses it. I didn't move. I just looked at the man's hand on his coat the way you'd look at a dog that was barking more than it meant to bite, and I waited. It was Naomi who broke it in the end. Not me standing my ground, that's just a man doing what a man does, and it doesn't make a story. She set the water bucket down slow, careful not to spill it, like spilling it would be the bigger crime of the day, and she walked up next to me. Not behind me. Next to me. She put her hand on my arm light, the way you'd touch something you weren't sure would let you, and she looked at Pratt steady as anything. He said no, she said. I don't see what there is to keep discussing. Pratt looked at her a long second. Then he looked at me, and something in his face shifted, not fear. Nothing so dramatic as that, just a recalculating, the same arithmetic I'd seen in her eyes that first day at the wagon, except now it was running the other direction. A man alone is one thing to push on. A man with somebody standing next to him, choosing to stand there, is a different proposition altogether, and Pratt had been doing this long enough to know the difference. He took his men and went. I didn't say anything to her about it that night. I split wood longer than I needed to, out past dark, because I didn't trust my own face yet to look at her without showing something I wasn't ready to show. Winter came in hard that year, came in like it had a grudge. We lost one of the goats to the cold despite everything we did, found her stiff in the pen one morning, and Naomi cried over that goat in a way I understood was really about everything else. The husband, the mother-in-law, the wagon, the long walk up a mountain to a stranger's cabin with nothing decided about her own life by her own hand. I let her cry. I didn't try to fix it with words. I dug the ground, hard as it was, and I buried that goat proper, and I didn't say a thing about it being just a goat, because it wasn't, not to her, not that morning. She started sleeping easier after that. I don't know how else to put it. Something in her unclenched, slow over the weeks, the way a fist goes soft when it finally believes nobody's swinging at it. She laughed once at something Caesar the mule did, a real laugh, surprised out of her. And she covered her mouth after like she'd been caught at something, and I told her she didn't have to cover it, and she looked at me a long moment and then didn't the next time. She asked me one night, both of us close to the stove with the wind working at the door, why I'd kept her. Not the goats, her. I thought about lying with something easy. I didn't. Because you looked at me like you were figuring out how to survive me, I said, and I didn't want to be one more thing somebody had to survive. She was quiet a long time after that. Then she said the cabin felt different than it had at the start. I asked different how. She said quieter, even though there was more sound in it now than there'd ever been, the spinning wheel going, the goats, her humming with the door creaking and her not stopping anymore. I understood what she meant. I'd lived alone with quiet so long I'd mistaken it for peace. This was something else. This had her in it. Pratt came back once more, late winter, with papers this time instead of men. Some claim filed against my water rights through a cousin of his in the county seat, the kind of trouble that takes more than standing still to beat. I rode down to fight it, 3 days gone, longest I'd left that cabin in 11 years. And I won't pretend I wasn't half sick the whole ride down wondering if I'd come back to an empty cabin and a note, because that's the kind of thing 11 years alone teaches a man to expect. I came back up the trail at dusk on the 3rd day, tired clean through. The claim settled in my favor, but the cost of it sitting heavy in my chest, and I saw the lamp lit in the window before I saw anything else. Smoke going, the goats penned proper, and her coming out onto the step before I'd even gotten close enough to call out, like she'd been listening for Caesar's particular gate on the trail for longer than made sense, unless she'd been listening every evening I was gone. She didn't say anything grand. She's not a woman built for grand. She just came down off the step and put both arms around me, dust and all, tired horse smell and 3 days of trail on me, and held on like she meant it to mean something, and after a minute she said, into my coat, not looking up, "I was scared you weren't coming back." "I always come back," I said. "I know," she said. "That's not the kind of scared I meant." I understood that too. I held on to her a while longer than the moment strictly called for, out there in the cold with Caesar shifting and snorting behind us, wanting his stall, and I didn't care. Let the mule wait. Mrs. Tillett came up the mountain once more, the following spring, alone this time, no wagon, on a borrowed horse she clearly didn't ride well. I figured she'd come for money, or to take the girl back if circumstances had changed for her, the way such women's circumstances sometimes do. She didn't ask for either. She sat on that horse a long minute looking at the cabin, the smoke, the mended fence, the goats fat and loud in their pen, Naomi standing in the doorway with flour on her hands and color in her face she hadn't had the day I met her. "You look well," Mrs. Tillett said to her, "not warm, just true." "I am well," Naomi said. The old woman looked at me then, and there was something in her face I hadn't expected, not an apology, she wasn't built for that either, but something close to a reckoning. "I didn't think a hermit on a mountain would do right by her," she said. "Folks said you'd gone strange up here. Said you didn't have it in you any more to care for anything." "Folks say a lot of things," I said. "I see that now." She looked at Naomi a moment longer, and then she turned that borrowed horse and went back down the mountain the way she'd come, and that was the last either of us saw of her. Naomi came and stood beside me, watching the dust settle on the trail, and I felt her hand find mine without either of us making a thing of it. "6 goats and a spinning wheel," she said after a while, half to herself. "Best trade I ever made," I said, and I didn't even know I was making it. She laughed, the real kind now, no hand over her mouth, and leaned her head against my shoulder, and we stood there a long while watching the last of the dust settle over the place where the trail bent out of sight, the goats complaining behind us, the spinning wheel turning slow in the open doorway where she'd left it mid-thread. And I thought, not for the first time, but for the first time without any ache behind it, that 11 years of quiet had just been waiting on something to fill it.